What's up? I'm John Middlekauff, the host of the 3 and Out podcast, and you can find it below in the description. Also, you're watching this on the Volumes YouTube channel. I need you to subscribe right now. Share with your friends. Let's fire around a couple camps. Arizona. The Kyler thing, I can't even imagine how many video games Kyler Murray played this week. He's home with the vid, not allowed to show up for 5 days, which I kind of looked. I couldn't find it. If you test positive for the vid and you feel fine, do you have to stay away for 5 days? Or is when you get back just the first time that you test negative? Because if I was the league, I know they banned all the mandates, right? You don't need some jab, you mask, all that shit's out the window. But like if I test positive, if I test negative the next day, am I cool to come back? Because when Kyler got it, they immediately said 5 days. And that is something to still keep an eye on. Like, if Mahomes just tests positive on like a Wednesday, he's just out for the game. Again, I couldn't quite find the information, and I'm sure that's subject to change. But interesting. He's home gaming. But listen, that whole thing was weird. We all admit it, right? The clause, and they put it in there for a reason. We can have our different theories on it, but it happened, and it did not go well, and they got embarrassed. The team got embarrassed. Kyler got embarrassed, and we all kind of look at him like, I'm interested to watch him play. Because if they struggle, specifically him, we're all going to make fun of him. Oh, he's not studying film. Oh, he didn't watch any film. Oh, he's been playing Call of Duty. Like, that's inevitable. That's unavoidable at this point. But part of the Kyler thing, it stems back to the offseason. Not just his contract demands, which, let's face it, after you play the worst postseason game we've ever seen and you still have several years on your contract, felt a little poorly timed, but in credit to him, it worked. He had a weak owner, and they capitulated. But to me, the craziest thing of this offseason with them, well, the contract is the craziest, but the second craziest was they're trying to keep Kyler happy, and they traded for Hopkins, was it last year or 2 years ago? And he's suspended, so he's out 6 games. They know it. And they lost Christian Kirk. But under Kingsbury, and I watch him a lot just because I watch the NFC West, is Rondale Moore, the kid they drafted out of Purdue, is really interesting. They can find little random wide receivers to function in that offense. Max Williams, their tight end, who got hurt last year, is coming back. They re-signed Zach Ertz. They got little, running backs. They'll be fine offensively in theory. Well, for whatever reason, when they wanted to keep Kyler happy, they traded a draft pick, and not just any draft pick, the 22nd overall pick for Hollywood Brown, who was going into his 4th season, who was also a small player. Like, they already have a small wide receiver, kind of like Hollywood. His name is Rondale Moore. And then, a couple days ago, and listen, by no means do I drive slow. I do not drive in the slow lane. So I am not trying to act like I've never sped, right? And listen, I drive a Tahoe, so it's hot. It's not like I'm going to go 120 miles on the freeway. If I drove a Porsche or a Mercedes, maybe I would be more likely to hit like 95 when I wasn't paying attention. Because listen, my mom has a newer car, and driving it home from Tahoe, because I had some issue with my Tahoe, you go 85 in some of these new cars, you don't even realize that they drive so smooth. And he was arrested the other day. And listen, like I said, I don't judge people for speeding in terms of just getting a speeding ticket. But when you get arrested for speeding, like, you're clearly doing something egregious. But to me, part of this symbolizes it's drip, 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 drip. I feel pretty confident. Like, I'm out on these guys. Their juju's off. They feel off. Everything with them feels off. Now, I don't think they're going to compete to get the number 1 overall pick. They have too much talent. But I think what we saw last year is going to be more of an outlier over these next couple years than something that's just going to be consistent and sustained. Their culture, never loved. Doing moves like this, trading just because he's the guy's friend, and he immediately gets arrested in his training camp, it's just not a good sign. Let's go to the Steelers. To sign Mitch Trubisky as your starting quarterback, and I get it, there aren't many options. You go to free agency, Roethlisberger retires, what the hell are you going to do? Who are they going to sign? Mariota, Trubisky, like all the names. Jimmy wasn't available at the time. There weren't many options, if any. So I don't mind signing him as a backup quarterback. And I think ultimately they gave him about $2 million. The Bills did it last year. But to sign him and then say he is going to be our starting quarterback is borderline insanity. Mitch Trubisky is not a starting quarterback, especially on a team that views themselves, and rightfully so, we got a playoff roster, we get decent quarterback play, we win 10, 11 games, we're in the playoffs 100%. That's how the Pittsburgh Steelers view themselves, and they consistently live up to that. Well, reports have been Mitch has been a little up and down. Of course he has. He's Mitch Trubisky. Then you go, well, hey, John, they drafted Kenny Pickett in the first round. And I believe this to my core. I think, and you're taught this as a scout, watch the player before you get the character write-up. Because when you're in a school and someone gives you a character and you start asking about the player, the guy, the person, and it's positive or negative, it's going to impact the way you think about a guy. So when I go in somewhere and the pro liaison, the offensive coordinator, the trainer, the equipment guy, the academic lady, every single person around the program is like, I freaking love James. I would let my daughter marry James. I would rent out a room for free for James. I would bet the house. If football disappeared tomorrow, James could be the CEO of Wells Fargo. He could start a tech company. He could go figure out the homeless problem in California. There is nothing this kid can't do if he puts his mind to it. And you're like, holy shit, this guy just sounds like an incredible human being. He is the type guy we would like on our team. Who wouldn't? This guy is fantastic. And then you watching him, you're like, well, I wish he was a little faster. I wish he had a little better hands. But you're like, I love this guy. You push him up. Same thing happens the opposite way, right? All the negative speech. And then you're watching him, he's really good. You're like, well, it's like, is he a good guy? It can impact you. And the one thing that Mike Tomlin and Kevin Colbert, they were around the guy. I saw it years ago with John Lynch and Solomon Thomas. John Lynch, I can't remember why, was taking a class at Stanford. Obviously, he was at Stanford. I don't know if maybe he was going back to graduate. I don't know the exact. I thought he graduated when he went pro, but he was involved in Stanford and was in a class or sat next to Solomon Thomas and got to know him. This is before he was a general manager. Fell in love with the guy because who wouldn't? Solomon Thomas is a fantastic human being. He was too close. Then they drafted him number 3 overall, and it was a disaster. Had no business being drafted that high. I don't care. It's like, well, a lot of people, a lot of pontificators had him going. If you watched him play and you knew what you were doing, under no circumstances would you draft that guy in the top 10. But once you get to know him, you're like, God, I want this guy in my building. And it backfired. And these guys, because Pittsburgh, the University of Pittsburgh, plays at the Steelers Stadium, I think their offices are right around there, they got to know the guy. And I've heard he's a great guy. And everyone's like, his play, he's kind of like a poor man's Mac Jones. And now he's running with the threes. He can't even get above Mason Rudolph. Now you could say maybe the Steelers are old school. You got to earn your time. I don't know. I never saw it. I never saw it, not for a second. Again, not disputing the guy. Seemed like a good guy. I'd be friends with him. Taking a guy in the first round to be your quarterback, that is a bold move, Cotton. And I think they were too close to it. Well, here's the thing with the Steelers. You're not paying Mitch anything. And honestly, Kenny Pickett, does he have to play this year? Of course not. He's running with the threes. Mason Rudolph cannot be your starting quarterback. We've seen that movie. It's a disaster. People walk out of it. How about Jimmy Garoppolo? I witnessed this week the most normal, bizarre thing I've ever seen in my entire life. Every day I went out to 49er practice. Practice starts around 10:30. But really, guys, they let us in at 10:25, 10:20, 10:30-ish. Everyone's already on the field. People are screwing around, stretching, doing different things. When you get out there is this third field that is kind of behind the stands. First 2 days, Jimmy Garoppolo just throwing. Players walking by him. Mike Shanahan, as he was walking out of the practice field, slaps Jimmy on the butt. They BS for 5 minutes. It's completely normal, even though this guy is on the team, but let's face it, he's no longer on the team. He's just throwing, waving to guys, throwing to trainers. By the third day of practice, he was on the practice field throwing a red zone. He looks like Jimmy Garoppolo. Arm looks normal. He looks in good shape. Fantastic hair. Tans on point. Jawline. Good-looking dude. And I was thinking, why don't the Steelers just go get this guy? We keep saying, like, what about Seattle? In what world would Jimmy want to go to Seattle? They suck. Obviously, Houston's going with Davis Mills. They should. The Giants, maybe, but they're terrible too. The Steelers are trying to make the playoffs, and they don't need Ben Roethlisberger in the prime. We just saw that last year. Roethlisberger couldn't throw past like 5 yards, but he was smart. He knew what he was doing. To me, if I'm the Steelers, and listen, you might know by about 2 weeks, like, we cannot have Mitch Trubisky be our starting quarterback. And Kenny Pickett isn't remotely ready. We just thought he was a great guy, and maybe he turns out to be a full-time backup. Why don't we go get Jimmy Garoppolo? Because Jimmy Garoppolo has proven if you have a really good team, you can make the playoffs with him as a starting quarterback. To me, that makes a lot of sense. And last but not least, there's a balance, right? If you leave a practice limping and it turns out like you didn't break an ankle or tear an ACL, it's like you're going to miss a week, like whatever, no big deal. And then there are these situations like, we're not concerned yet, but this is a little weird. Like Chandler Jones hasn't practiced, right, with the Raiders. It's like, well, he's got an undisclosed injury. And I've been monitoring this from afar, but it's hard to tell with McVay because even last year he gave Stafford some time off. He doesn't make him play in the preseason. I saw Rap Sheet to say today that Stafford, and I remember my dad had tennis elbow. The guy he worked for, Jack, had awful arthritis and tendonitis, and I've seen it in other people. I've never had it, but know people that have had it at different ages. I've known younger people that have had it. It's clearly very painful. And there are different reasons for it. Again, not a medical doctor, is that he's got tendonitis in his throwing elbow. And anyone listening that follows baseball knows that, like, usually that's a bad precursor. I think once upon a time that kind of started that way with Roethlisberger. And I'm not saying to overreact to this, but even Rap Sheet was like, they're pretty confident that everything's going to be okay. And to me, this is just something to keep an eye on because he's a guy who's predicated on a big arm, and he's been throwing now for a long time that the only thing that could like if Aaron Donald had an injury and missed a bunch of games, whatever. If Stafford goes out, the Rams would be fucked. It would be a disaster. I don't blame them for slow playing this, not having him throw. Completely makes sense. That is the right move. But if he does get hurt or this persists, and worst case scenario, wherever to need surgery, it would be bye-bye to them for the season. So the only way that this process in which they've done to build the team, respect the hell out of it. You just saw it in baseball with the Padres. I admire any team, any business, any human being that's willing to take their chips, put it to the middle of the table. That takes balls. But the reality is, anyone that's played poker knows that when you double down in blackjack, sometimes you lose. Sometimes you double down on 11 and they give you a 3. And then the dealer, pops an 18. And they take, depending on how many cocktails you've had and drinks, $1,000, $500, $200, $5,000. I don't know how much you're betting, but it hurts. You get pissed. Unless you've had a lot of cocktails, then you just place another bet. But when you put all your chips in the middle of the table, the simple reality is you're not always going to hit. There's stock, skills, I've put a lot of money into. It is a disaster right now, and it had a disaster day. I'm way down. And listen, I was thinking today, one day in like 3 or 4 years, it's either going to be like a 5, 6, 10 bagger, or I'm going to lose 6 figures on it. There's no in between. Like, there's no in between with the Rams. They're either going to be a power or they're going to be a disaster. I never see them, they're just like, 8 and 9. Like, no, that ain't their thing. And they're not playing for that, which I respect. Like, they didn't want to, they're going all in. And to me, the only true thing that would completely derail them would be this guy. And listen, he is, I respect Matt Stafford. I love Matt Stafford as a player. Partly because of the way what he proved last year. I was kind of out on him in midseason, and he answered the bell. He showed his moxie. He was awesome in the playoffs. He seems like a fantastic dude. Who doesn't love that guy as a human being? Let alone I like strong arm quarterbacks. He's my style of player. Like, interceptions don't bother me if you make big plays, and he's a big play guy. But that arm, I mean, it's literally worth like $250 million. I think they just gave him a huge $200 million contract extension. So just something to keep an eye on, man, because we've seen it in recent years with Roethlisberger. Again, he was older. See it with pitchers all the time. I remember the Giants with Matt Cain, who wasn't really a hard thrower, but his arm went. And it happens with, was it DeGrom has had elbow problems? What's his name? The other dude that was on the Mets, I think he's now on the Angels. Syndergaard. All these guys, their arms blow. It's a little different with pitching, but if that goes, woo-wee, bye-bye Rams. But that's what they signed up for. They would be the first to tell you that. And it's worked. They're the Super Bowl champions for a reason because, they quadrupled down and they hit on 21. Thanks for watching 3 and Out. You can check out the podcast below in the description. And make sure you subscribe right now to the Volumes YouTube channel.